They say a perfect life is like a perfectly brewed cup of coffee, rich, warm, and comforting. My life, for 47 years, had been just that. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am the woman who lived on Elmwood Drive, in a little house with a front porch swing and a garden that knew more about my secrets than anyone else. I was 50 years old, but I felt timeless, an anchor in the peaceful bay of my small suburban town, where the only drama was the one-upmanship between neighbors over who could grow the most magnificent roses. Our house wasn't grand. It was an honest home, with a soul carved into every floorboard. It smelled of freshly brewed coffee in the mornings and old books in the evenings. On a good day, you might also catch the faint, sweet scent of sawdust that clung to my husband, Robert, even after he had washed his hands and put his tools away for the night. Robert was a craftsman, a carpenter with hands that were rough from years of shaping wood, yet gentle enough to hold mine on our nightly walks. He didn't just build furniture, he built legacies. The magnificent oak table that stood in our dining room was a testament to his love, each curve and grain telling a story of a family he was so proud to have. I, on the other hand, worked with a different kind of material, young minds. For 30 years, I was a fifth-grade teacher at the local elementary school. My days were a symphony of childish laughter, the rustle of turning pages, and the endless pursuit of teaching fractions. When I came home, my head was still buzzing with the day's tales, stories about a boy who drew a dinosaur on his math test, or a girl who insisted that the moon was made of cheese. Robert would listen with that quiet, steady patience of his, a small, knowing smile on his lips. We had 2 sons, our own pieces of art. Nicholas, our firstborn, was a sunbeam. He was all laughter, all energy, and a generous heart. He was the kind of boy who would give you the shirt off his back and then help his father in the shop without ever being asked. Nicholas was the soul of our home, a constant, cheerful presence. He was the older brother, the protector, always looking out for his younger brother, Liam. Liam was a different kind of season. He was the quiet of a winter afternoon, reserved and introspective. He loved with the same intensity as Nicholas, but it was a quiet love, a love expressed through small gestures rather than loud proclamations. He was the son who would leave a hot cup of tea on my desk when I was grading papers, or silently put a log on the fire to keep me warm. While Nicholas would talk to Robert for hours about his dreams of becoming an engineer, Liam would sit at the dinner table, picking at his food, a silent observer in the symphony of our lives. On Sundays, after church, our house was the heart of the neighborhood. The family would gather around Robert's handmade table. The air would be thick with the smell of my roasted chicken and the sound of our 2 boys' different melodies. Nicholas, with his bold, optimistic voice, would regale us with his plans for the future. He spoke of college applications, of a life he would build for himself and for us, his parents. He was our future, a lighthouse guiding our path. Liam, however, would be a quiet presence. He would just listen, his face unreadable, his eyes distant. I always tried to draw him into the conversation, asking him about his day or his dreams, but he would only offer a simple shrug or a small, non-committal, "It's fine, Mom." I used to think it was just his way, his nature, that he was simply more of an observer than a participant. Every evening, after the day had settled and the house had grown still, Robert and I would take a walk. We'd walk down our street, hand in hand, past the neighbors' manicured lawns and the familiar oak trees. We'd talk about everything and nothing, our hopes for our sons, our plans for retirement, the dream of traveling the world. We were 2 halves of a whole, an unbreakable unit. I never imagined those quiet walks were just training for the one that would nearly kill me. We were so happy, so comfortable in our little bubble of a perfect life, that we failed to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. We were so busy watching our boys grow that we missed the moment one of them stopped growing in the right direction. It's a cruel irony, isn't it? The people who love you the most can sometimes be the ones who hurt you the deepest. And a perfect life, I would discover years later, often hides the deepest and darkest tragedies. The tranquility of our home on Elmwood Drive began to feel like a fragile piece of glass. It wasn't a sudden, shattering blow, but the slow, creeping pressure that announces a crack. The change started subtly, just a whisper in the hallways that turned to strained silence whenever Robert or I appeared. Nicholas, our sunbeam, no longer shone as brightly. His laughter was still there, but it carried an edge, a sharpness I'd never heard before. He began to argue with Liam about things I didn't understand. I'd overhear fragments of their hushed conversations, a tense murmur about a business mistake, a frustrated plea about paying it back. The words felt foreign in the comfortable confines of our home, like a different language spoken in the dark. When I asked Robert what was wrong, he'd just brush it off. "It's brotherly stuff, Alina," he'd say. "It'll pass. They're just growing up." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him because the alternative was a truth I didn't want to face. On those Sunday afternoons, the silence that had always characterized Liam now felt heavy, weighted with unspoken things. Nicholas, who used to joke and tease his younger brother, now watched him with a look I couldn't place, a mix of sadness and suspicion. He would tell us about his plans to study engineering, and Liam would just sit there, picking at his food. He looked like a guest at our own table, a stranger in the very house he grew up in. His quietness, once a peaceful part of our family's melody, had become a jarring silence. It was a silence that made you feel like you were holding your breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Robert and I still took our nightly walks, but now they were different. Our conversations were no longer about dreams, but about doubts. "Do you think something's wrong?" I'd ask, my voice barely a whisper. Robert would squeeze my hand, his grip tighter than usual. He would say nothing at first, and then, with a sigh, he'd offer the same answer he'd given me a dozen times before. "They're fine, Alina. They'll figure it out." But I could see the shadow in his eyes, a flicker of doubt he was trying to hide from me. Robert had always been the stronger one, the rock of our family, but now even his resolve seemed to be cracking. One evening, as I was walking past Nicholas's room, I saw him standing in the doorway, staring down the hall at his younger brother's door. He had a look of such deep sorrow on his face that my heart ached. "Honey, is everything okay?" I asked, my voice soft. He flinched as if he hadn't heard me. He turned and offered me a sad half-smile. "It's nothing, Mom, just brother's stuff." But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. It was something more, something deeper, a hidden conflict that was slowly, silently tearing our family apart. That night, exactly 25 years ago in a cold October, Nicholas didn't come home for dinner. We waited. 11 o'clock became midnight, and midnight became 1 in the morning. Robert went out to search for him with our neighbors, combing every corner of our small town, checking every place Nicholas used to go. Liam stayed in his room, supposedly studying, but I kept checking on him, and every time I asked if he knew where his brother was, his eyes would betray a strange, haunted look. I never could have imagined then that the truth was something so much more horrible than I could ever have conceived. At dawn, Robert returned, his face a mask of grief. The police found Nicholas's body at the bottom of the river gorge. They told us it was an accident, that he had likely stumbled in the dark. I didn't question it. How could I? I couldn't bear to think that something more sinister had happened in our perfect, peaceful town. Nicholas's funeral was a blur of black dresses and hushed whispers. I wore the same black dress I'd worn at my mother's funeral, a garment now steeped in a second tragedy. Liam was strangely calm. While I cried until I had no tears left, he remained silent, his expression now, in retrospect, sending shivers down my spine. Robert never left my side that day, holding me up when my legs gave out, whispering words of comfort that I now know tasted bitter in his mouth. After Nicholas's death, Liam changed completely. He became more attentive, more loving. He helped me with chores, accompanied his father in the workshop, and brought me things when he saw I was sad. I thought it was his way of dealing with grief, of filling the void Nicholas had left behind. But how naive I was. He wasn't filling a void. He was building a perfect mask to hide the monster inside. The years that followed were a testament to the human capacity for denial. The funeral, the mourning, the quiet, aching emptiness of our house, it all became a part of a past we chose to bury. We learned to live with the wound, to navigate around the phantom limb that was Nicholas. The hole he left was vast, a crater in the center of our family, but we filled it with a manufactured version of happiness. Liam's transformation was startling, almost too perfect. He became the son we thought we had lost. He helped me with the shopping, always offering to carry the heaviest bags. He'd bring me wildflowers he'd picked on his way home from work, just like his father used to. He started spending more time in Robert's workshop, learning the trade with a quiet intensity. He became a son who was no longer just an observer, but a full participant in our lives. I found myself clinging to his presence, finding solace in his newfound attention. I believed this was his way of making amends, of filling the void left by his brother's absence. How foolish I was. What he was truly doing was building a facade, a carefully constructed mask to hide the monster inside. The years passed. Liam married Jessica, a sweet girl from a neighboring town, and they seemed to be perfectly happy. Jessica was a ray of sunshine in our lives. She would call me Mom and help me with the housework whenever they visited. She was always so cheerful, so loving, and so eager to please. She and Liam had 2 beautiful children, and I finally felt like life was giving us a second chance at happiness. Our grandchildren were a balm for my aching soul, a promise that life, despite everything, would find a way to flourish again. Liam inherited Robert's talent for carpentry, and he built a successful business of his own. He designed beautiful, modern furniture that was a stark contrast to his father's traditional work, but it was just as exquisite. Everything seemed perfect again. The tragedy of Nicholas's death had been relegated to a painful but distant memory. We had moved on. We had to. But now, lying here at the bottom of this gorge, with my ribs broken and the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, I understand that all that happiness was a lie, a meticulously crafted charade. The first signs that something was wrong began 6 months ago, when Robert and I decided to update our will. We had saved our entire lives, and between the house, the land I inherited from my parents, and our bank savings, we had nearly $200,000 to leave to our children and grandchildren. It was Liam who suggested we visit the lawyer. "Mom, Dad, you're both 60 years old now," he said, with that smile that now seems sinister. "It's important to have everything in order." Jessica would nod beside him, her fingers stroking my hand with that false affection that would later push me to my death. "We love you so much, and we want to make sure you're protected," she added in her syrupy voice. How foolish I was to interpret those words as genuine love and concern. The lawyer, an old man named Albert whom we had known for years, explained the options. We could put everything in a trust, divide the inheritance among our grandchildren, or simply make a traditional will. Liam insisted on naming him and Jessica as our sole heirs, arguing that they would handle the equitable distribution to our grandchildren. "Besides," he said, "you're going to need us when you're older. It's better for us to have access to the resources to take care of you properly." Something in his tone made me uncomfortable, but Robert seemed convinced. My husband, who had always been more trusting than me, accepted the proposal without much resistance. I had my doubts, especially since I remembered how Nicholas had always talked about helping us financially when we got older. He had plans, dreams of taking care of us when the time came, but Nicholas was gone, and Liam was our only surviving child. We signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember Jessica was wearing a pretty green dress and gave me a big hug after the ceremony. "Now we're officially a united family forever," she whispered in my ear. Her words gave me a chill then, though I didn't understand why. Liam shook his father's hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That night, as I made dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the familiar clinking of dishes, it all felt wrong, tainted by the silent deal we had just made. A new chapter of our lives had begun, one not of peace, but of pretense. The weeks following the signing of the will were strange, as if a new, unpleasant layer had settled over our lives. Liam and Jessica started visiting more often, but their visits had a different feel. They no longer came to simply spend time with family, they came with an agenda. Their eyes, once filled with affection, now seemed to be constantly calculating, assessing, and evaluating. "Mom, you should really think about selling this big house and moving somewhere smaller," Jessica said one afternoon, her gaze sweeping over our living room with a critical air. "We could help you find a comfortable apartment in town. It would be so much easier for you." But I loved our house. Every corner held a memory. The kitchen, where I had prepared thousands of meals for my family. The workshop where Robert had created his masterpieces, his hands moving with the grace of a true artist. The yard where our children and grandchildren had played, their laughter echoing in the shade of the big oak tree. I couldn't imagine my life anywhere else. This house was a part of our history, a living testament to 40 years of marriage and a lifetime of hard work. When I told them this, a flicker of irritation crossed Liam's face. It was gone in an instant, but it chilled me to the bone. "Mom, you're being irrational," he said, in a tone he had never used with me before. "This house is too big for two people your age. If you fall down the stairs or something happens, we won't be able to help you in time." Jessica nodded vigorously beside him, adding, "Besides, the upkeep must cost a fortune. It would be much smarter to sell now, while the housing market is high, and move to something more appropriate for your age." Robert, ever the practical one, began to consider their arguments. My husband, who had always been grounded and logical, started talking about the wisdom behind their suggestions. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something darker, behind all this sudden pressure. One night, after yet another of these tense conversations, I asked Robert if he didn't think it was strange that Liam was suddenly so interested in our financial affairs. "Eleanor, he just cares about us," he replied, brushing his teeth in the bathroom. "Maybe we should consider his suggestions. We're not as young as we used to be." But I saw something in my husband's eyes, a shadow of doubt he didn't want to acknowledge. Now I know that Robert already had his suspicions, that he had started to connect the dots that I didn't even know existed. Things escalated when Liam suggested we give him power of attorney over our finances. "It's just for precaution," he explained, while Jessica prepared tea in our kitchen as if she owned the place. "If one of you gets sick or has a health issue, we can manage your affairs without legal complications." The way he said it, so naturally, so logically, it almost convinced me, but there was something about his insistence that made me nervous. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Robert's breathing beside me, trying to understand why I felt so uneasy. The next day, I decided to call my sister Harriet for advice. Harriet had always been sharper than me, more suspicious of people's intentions. When I told her about Liam's pressure, she was silent for a long moment. "Eleanor," she finally said, Doesn't it seem strange to you that Liam is so anxious to control your money? I mean, he has his own business. He's doing well financially. Why would he need so much control over your finances? Her words hit me like a slap. She was right. Liam had never seemed to have financial problems. He had never borrowed money or shown any signs of needing our help. That afternoon, when Liam came for another of his talks about the future, I decided to confront him directly. "Son," I said as we sat in the living room, "why is it so important for you to have control over our financial affairs? Your father and I are still in our right minds." His reaction was immediate and telling. His face hardened, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of someone else, something cold, calculating, and dangerous. "Mom, it's not about control," he responded in a tense voice. "It's about love, care, and family responsibility." But the way he said family responsibility sounded more like a threat than an expression of affection. Jessica, who had been silent until then, intervened with her sweet but firm voice. "Eleanor, we just want what's best for you. It's painful to see you worry about things we could easily handle." That night, after they left, Robert and I had our first serious argument in years. He thought I was being paranoid, that I was looking for problems where there were none. I insisted something wasn't right, that our son's behavior had changed too much. "Robert," I said as we washed the dishes, "do you remember what Liam was like before Nicholas died? He was different, more distant, more. I don't know how to explain it, but there was something about him that scared me." My husband stopped washing the plate in his hands and looked at me intently. In his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before, recognition. "Eleanor," he said in a very low voice, "there are things about Nicholas's death that I never told you." My heart began to pound so hard I thought it would beat out of my chest. Robert's words hit me like a lightning bolt. What else could there be? What had he been hiding all these years? The perfect life we had built was collapsing around us, and I knew, with chilling certainty, that the cracks went all the way down to the foundation. The clinking of the silverware against the porcelain plates had ceased. The kitchen, once the heart of our home, now felt like a tomb. Robert's words hung in the air, heavy and thick with a truth I had been subconsciously dreading for 25 years. "What about Nicholas's death?" I asked, my voice a mere tremble, a fragile echo of a woman who had just realized her entire life was a lie. Robert sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, the very chair he had carved with his own hands. It was the same table where we had shared thousands of family meals, where Nicholas used to do his homework, and where Liam had always remained silent. Robert ran his hands over his face, as if he were trying to erase the memories that had tormented him for a quarter of a century. "The night Nicholas died," he began, his voice broken, a hollow whisper in the quiet room. "Liam wasn't in his room studying like he told us. I saw him leave the house around 8 o'clock. I followed him because something about his attitude worried me. He'd been very strange those days, more aggressive, more resentful." My world began to spin. Every detail, every memory of that night was suddenly seen through a new, sinister lens. The way Liam had avoided my eyes, the cold calm he had shown at the funeral, the unsettling shift in his demeanor after the tragedy, it all made a terrible, twisted sense. Robert paused, looking at his hands as if the horrible truth he had kept for so long was written on them. "I saw them arguing by the gorge, Eleanor. I heard them screaming horrible things at each other." "What were they arguing about?" I whispered, a desperate part of me no longer wanting to know the answer. Robert looked up, and I saw tears in his eyes, tears he hadn't even shed at our firstborn son's funeral. "About the inheritance, Eleanor. Liam was furious because Nicholas was the oldest, because according to family traditions, he would inherit most of our assets. But there was something more, something about money that Nicholas had found." "What money?" I asked, feeling the ground vanish beneath my feet. Robert sighed deeply before continuing. 3 days before he died, Nicholas came to talk to me in the workshop. He had discovered that Liam had been stealing money from the family savings account. Small amounts at first, but then larger sums. Nicholas had proof. He'd been investigating for months. My mind refused to process what I was hearing. My youngest son, the one who had been so attentive after Nicholas's death, the one who had helped and cared for us, had been stealing from us since before his brother died. The betrayal was a physical ache in my chest, a pain that rivaled my grief for Nicholas. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I accused Robert, feeling the betrayal multiply twofold. "Because when I got to the gorge that night, it was already too late," he replied in a choked voice. I saw Liam standing next to Nicholas's body. Our youngest son was trembling, crying, and repeating over and over, "It was an accident, it was an accident." Robert looked at me with those desperate eyes and begged me to help him. "Dad," he said, "Nicholas tripped when he was trying to hit me. I just defended myself and he lost his balance." Tears ran down my cheeks uncontrollably, mixing with the sudden, sharp grief of the truth. "But you believed him," I murmured, even though I already knew the answer. Robert nodded slowly, with an expression of guilt that had haunted him for decades. "He was my son, Alina. My youngest son was asking for my help, and Nicholas was already dead. I couldn't bring one back to life by destroying the other. I thought it was really an accident that Liam had learned his lesson, that he would become a better man after this." "And the stolen money?" I asked, needing to know every detail of this nightmare. "Liam promised he would pay it back little by little, that he had taken the money to invest in a business that had gone wrong. He swore he would never do something like that again. And I believed him, Alina. God forgive me, but I believed him because I needed to believe my son wasn't a killer." I got up from the table, stumbling, holding onto the wall so I wouldn't fall. Everything I had believed about my family, about my surviving son, about the last 25 years of my life was a lie. "Did he pay the money back?" I asked, although I already knew the answer from the look on Robert's face. "Never," he replied. In fact, he kept stealing small amounts that I pretended not to notice because confronting him would mean admitting I had covered up a murder. I became his accomplice, Alina. Every time I stayed silent, every time I pretended not to see the bank accounts dwindle, I became more of his accomplice. The horrible reality began to take shape in my mind. "That's why he's so interested in controlling our finances now," I murmured. "It's not because he cares about us. It's because he wants to finish what he started 25 years ago." Robert nodded gravely. "And there's something else, Alina. Something I just discovered a few weeks ago." "What else could there be?" I asked, feeling like my heart couldn't take any more revelations. Robert went to his desk and pulled out some papers he had been hiding under other documents. "I've been discreetly investigating Liam's finances. His carpentry business isn't doing as well as he wants us to believe. In fact, he's on the verge of bankruptcy. He owes more than $100,000 to several banks and suppliers." The papers trembled in my hands as I read the numbers. Liam wasn't the successful man he pretended to be. He was a desperate failure who had been living on lies and stolen money for decades. "Does Jessica know all this?" I asked, remembering her sweet smile and loving hugs. "I'm sure she does," Robert replied. "I've noticed how she directs the conversations when they talk about our money, how she asks specific questions about our savings, the value of the house, our life insurance policies. They aren't innocent questions, Alina. They are questions from someone calculating exactly how much our death is worth." That sentence chilled me to the bone. "Our death," I repeated in a whisper. It was the first time I had considered that Liam might want to cause us physical harm. Until that moment, I thought he just wanted to rob or cheat us. But if he had killed his own brother for money, what would stop him from killing his parents for the same reason? Robert, I said, grabbing his hands, my voice a desperate plea. We have to go to the police. We have to tell them the truth about Nicholas and about what's happening now. But my husband shook his head with a look of hopelessness that broke my heart. With what evidence, Eleanor? I'm an accomplice to covering up a murder. If I talk now, I'll go to jail too. And besides, who's going to believe an old man of 65 who has been keeping this secret for 25 years? He was right. The lie had been woven into the very fabric of our lives for so long, it was impossible to simply pull a single thread without the entire tapestry unraveling. Do we just wait for him to kill us like he killed Nicholas? I asked, the words a bitter taste on my tongue. We're going to be very careful, Robert said, trying to sound more confident than he really was. We're going to find a way to protect ourselves, to gather evidence too. His words were interrupted by the shrill sound of the phone ringing. It was Liam. "Hi, Mom," he said with that sweet voice that now sounded sinister to me. "Jessica and I were thinking, and we believe it would be beautiful to celebrate your 40th wedding anniversary with something special. How about we take you to those mountains you've always talked about next weekend? We could go on a family hike, take pictures, and have a perfect day together." My blood turned to ice. I looked at Robert, who had heard the conversation and had the same look of terror on his face. "That's a very sweet idea, son," I managed to reply in a trembling voice. "But let us think about it, and we'll get back to you tomorrow." After hanging up, Robert and I looked at each other in silence, knowing we had just received an invitation to our own execution. "The mountains," I murmured. "He's going to take us to the mountains to kill us and make it look like an accident." Robert nodded gravely, just like he did with Nicholas at the gorge. That night, we didn't sleep a minute, holding each other in our bed, planning how we could save ourselves from our own son. The next few days were a nightmare of terror and pretense. Robert and I had to act as if nothing had happened when Liam and Jessica came to visit, smiling when they talked about the mountain trip, nodding when they excitedly told us they were going to spend time with family. But inside, every fiber of my being screamed with fear. I knew I was looking into the eyes of my oldest son's murderers, and that now they were planning to do the same to me and my husband. Jessica arrived on Wednesday afternoon with a shopping bag and that radiant smile that now seemed like the grimace of a demon. "Eleanor, dear," she said, hugging me with those arms that would soon push me to my death. "I bought some supplies for our mountain adventure. Cookies, water, fruit, everything we'll need for the picnic." She showed me the contents of the bag as if she were an excited child, but I could only think about how each of those items could be used to cover up our murder. "I also brought my new camera," she added, pulling out an expensive digital camera. "I want to capture every moment of this special day. They're going to be photos we'll treasure forever." The irony of her words made me sick. The only photo she would take would be of our broken bodies at the bottom of some cliff if anyone ever found us. Liam appeared behind her carrying a new-looking hiking backpack. "Dad," he said to Robert with feigned enthusiasm, "I bought all the necessary equipment for a safe hike. Ropes, harnesses, lanterns, a first aid kit." Every word that came out of his mouth sounded like a cruel mockery. Safety equipment to plan our murders. The perversity of the situation made me dizzy. "Isn't it a bit dangerous for people our age?" I asked, trying to sound casual while looking for any excuse to cancel the trip. Jessica stroked my cheek with that false tenderness that churned my stomach. "That's why we chose a very easy and safe trail," she assured me. "It's a hike even kids can do. Plus, Liam and I will be there to take care of you the whole time." Yes, they would be there to take care of us until the exact moment they decided to push us off a cliff. That night, when they finally left, Robert and I sat in our living room, trembling not just from the cold, but from the absolute terror we had been holding back for hours. "We can't go," I said, grabbing his hands. "We'll just make up some excuse." "If we don't go," Robert replied in a grave voice, "they'll find another way to kill us. Maybe something that looks even more accidental, like a house fire or a robbery gone wrong. At least in the mountains, we know what they're going to try to do." His words had a terrible logic, but they didn't comfort me at all. "So, what do you suggest?" I asked, desperate to find some solution that would save our lives. Robert was thoughtful for a few minutes before answering. "We're going to go, but we're going to be prepared. I'm going to hide my cell phone and set it to record everything that happens. If we manage to survive, we'll have evidence. And if we don't," his voice broke, "at least someone will know the truth." On Friday night, we could barely touch our dinner. We knew it might be our last meal together in our house, in that kitchen where we had shared so many happy moments when we were a real family. Robert reviewed his will one more time, making sure that if something happened to us, at least Liam wouldn't get everything without there being some record of our suspicions. "I wrote a letter," he confessed, pulling a sealed envelope from his desk. "It's addressed to your sister Harriet. In it, I explain everything we know about Nicholas's death and what we believe Liam plans to do to us. He hid it in the place where we keep our important documents. If we don't return from this trip, at least she'll know where to look for the truth." That night, we went to bed holding each other, whispering words of love that could be our last. "If something happens to me," Robert said, "I want you to know that these 40 years with you have been the best of my life. Despite everything, despite the mistakes and the secrets, I love you more than my own life." I cried in silence, memorizing the rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body, the smell of his skin. The sun would rise tomorrow, but for us, it might be the start of an eternal night. Saturday dawned with a clear, mocking sky. The sun rose, brilliant and unforgiving, as if unaware of the dark journey we were about to begin. Liam arrived early, whistling a cheerful tune that chilled my blood. "Morning, lovebirds," he called from the front door. "Ready for your big adventure?" Jessica appeared behind him, radiant as a bride on her wedding day, except this was a wedding with death. She carried her new camera, her smile bright and innocent. At breakfast, which we could barely eat, Liam spread a map on the table, detailing the route we would take. "It's a beautiful trail," he said, his eyes shining with an enthusiasm that seemed demonic. "It leads to a lookout where you can see the whole valley. They say the views are spectacular." Of course, the views would be spectacular. They would be the last ones we would see in our lives. "The trail has some steep parts," Jessica added, as if giving us useful tourist information, "but nothing that experienced hikers like you can't handle." Her comment about our supposed hiking abilities sounded like a cruel joke. We were two 60-year-olds who barely walked through the park once a week. As we loaded the car, I saw Liam meticulously checking his backpack, making sure he had everything he needed for his plan. I saw ropes, a small shovel, and something that looked like a flare gun. "What's that for?" I asked, pointing to the gun. "For safety," he replied without missing a beat. "If we get lost or something goes wrong, we can send a distress signal." Of course, they would send a distress signal after pushing us off a cliff so our bodies could be found, and it would be confirmed that it was a tragic accident during a family hike. Everything was calculated. Every detail had been planned to make our murders look perfectly natural. The car ride to the mountains lasted 2 hours that felt like an eternity. Jessica put on cheerful music, and she sang along with the songs as if we were really going on a fun family outing. Liam drove carefully, obeying all the speed limits, stopping at every stop sign. He didn't want to risk an accident that would ruin his perfect plans. During the trip, Robert discreetly took my hand and activated the recording on his phone. Everything that happened from that moment on would be recorded. If we managed to survive, we would have proof. If not, at least the truth wouldn't die with us. When we finally arrived at the trailhead, My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would beat out of my chest. The place was beautiful, with tall trees and the sound of a nearby river. But for me, it had become the setting for my own execution. Liam and Jessica took their backpacks out of the car, smiling and joking as if it were the happiest day of their lives. "Ready for the adventure?" Liam asked. And for the first time in 25 years, I saw the same cold glint in his eyes that he'd had the night he killed his brother. The trail started out relatively easy, winding between lush trees and moss-covered rocks. Jessica walked ahead of us, constantly taking pictures and commenting on the beauty of the landscape. "Look at those wildflowers," she exclaimed, pointing toward bushes full of yellow blossoms. Her performance was perfect, that of a loving daughter-in-law enjoying a special day with her in-laws. Liam walked behind us, supposedly to make sure we didn't fall behind, but I could feel his eyes on our backs like daggers. Every time I turned to look at him, he smiled with that grin he had perfected over 25 years of lies. "How are you doing, Mom and Dad?" he would ask with fake concern. "Need to stop and rest." After an hour of hiking, we began to climb a steeper part of the trail. My legs already felt heavy, and Robert was breathing with difficulty. We weren't used to this kind of exercise, and our murderous children knew it perfectly. They had chosen a route that would physically exhaust us, making us vulnerable for when the time came to execute their plan. "We're almost at the lookout," Jessica announced. Although according to the map I had seen at home, we still had at least another hour of hiking. Her lie confirmed that they had no intention of reaching the real lookout. The place where they planned to kill us must be much closer. During the hike, I tried to memorize every detail of the trail, every tree, every rock that could serve as a reference if I managed to survive and needed to explain to the police exactly where everything had happened. Robert was doing the same, and we occasionally exchanged glances loaded with terror and determination. We knew we were walking toward our deaths, but we also knew it was our only chance to get evidence against our murderers. "Oh, look at that!" Jessica suddenly shouted, pointing to a rock formation that loomed to our right. "That cliff has an incredible view. Why don't we climb up there to take some special photos?" My blood ran cold. There it was, the place they had chosen for our murder. The cliff rose about 90 feet above the main trail, accessible by a secondary path that seemed much more dangerous than the one we had been following. The rocks were loose, and there were fewer trees to grab onto in case we stumbled. From the top, you could see a precipice that fell into a deep gorge full of jagged rocks. "I don't know if that's a good idea," I said, trying to sound casual. "That trail looks pretty dangerous for people our age." But Liam had already started walking toward the turnoff, carrying his backpack full of safety equipment that I knew he wouldn't use to save us. "Come on, Mom," he said with that voice he used when he was a kid and wanted to convince me of something. "It'll only take a few minutes. Besides, Jessica's right. The photos from up there are going to be spectacular." The way he said spectacular made me tremble. They would be spectacular for whoever saw them afterward as evidence of our accident. Robert squeezed my hand discreetly, reminding me that his phone was recording everything. We had to go on. We had to go all the way to get the evidence we needed. If we refused now, they would simply find another opportunity, another place, another excuse to kill us. The climb to the cliff was exhausting. The loose rocks slid under our feet, and more than once I was about to fall. But the most terrifying thing was realizing how perfect this place was for a murder. If someone accidentally tripped and fell from the top, there would be no way to survive. And most importantly, there would be no witnesses. The climb to the cliff was exhausting, a grim parody of a family outing. The loose rocks slid under my feet, and more than once I nearly stumbled. But the physical exertion paled in comparison to the dread that coiled in my stomach. The place was a perfect stage for a murder. No witnesses, no chance of survival, just a sheer drop into a jagged abyss. Almost there, Jessica shouted from above, her voice as cheerful as a chirping bird. She had reached the top with an unsettling agility, a clear sign that this route was far from an innocent choice. Liam followed her, then helped Robert and me complete the last few feet of the climb. His hands on my arms felt like the claws of a vulture. The lookout was indeed spectacular. From our vantage point, you could see the entire valley, the distant mountains, and the river winding through the trees. Under any other circumstance, it would have been a breathtaking moment to share with family. But knowing what I knew, the place seemed less like a scenic overlook and more like the perfect setting for a nightmare. "Come over here for the photos," Jessica shouted, positioning herself near the very edge of the cliff. "I want the valley to be in the background." Robert and I approached slowly, each step bringing us closer to our final destination. I could see Liam strategically positioning himself behind us, calculating angles, measuring distances. He was a predator and we were his prey. "Perfect," Jessica exclaimed, raising her camera. "Now hug each other and smile." Robert and I hugged, probably for the last time, our embrace a silent plea for protection. I held him tight, and he held me tighter, as if we could somehow fuse our bodies together and become a single, unbreakable force. As Jessica took picture after picture, every flash of the camera seemed like a lightning bolt, announcing the storm that was about to come. "Take one more," Liam suggested, his voice a low, commanding tone. "But this time, stand back a little so the landscape looks better." One step back meant being exactly on the edge of the precipice. Robert and I exchanged a look. The time had come. We moved back as we were told, feeling the solid ground disappear under our feet and only the emptiness of the abyss remaining behind us. Jessica raised the camera one more time, but this time I saw something different in her eyes. The pretense was gone. The mask had fallen. "Smile," she said in a voice that was no longer sweet at all. "This is going to be your last photo." At that moment, Liam lunged toward us with his arms outstretched. The plan was chillingly simple: push us backward, watch us fall into the void, take a few photos of the accident, and then go down to discover our broken bodies. But Robert had been preparing for this moment. In the last second, he managed to grab Liam's wrist and pull him forward. "If we're going to die, you're coming with us," he shouted with a fury I had never seen in him before. For a moment, all four of us were teetering on the edge of the cliff, holding on to each other in a macabre dance between life and death. Jessica screamed and tried to help Liam, but the weight of all of us was too much. I felt the ground give way under my feet, felt gravity begin to win the battle. And then we fell. All four of us, locked in a deadly embrace, screaming as the air whistled around us and the rocky ground approached at a terrifying speed. In those seconds that stretched into an eternity, I thought of Nicholas. I wondered if he had felt the same way when Liam pushed him into the gorge 25 years ago. The impact was brutal. I heard the horrible sound of bones cracking, the sound of my own body shattering against the rocks. The pain was indescribable, but even more terrible was the taste of blood in my mouth and the certainty that this time Liam had won. This time there would be no witnesses to tell the truth. But then I heard Robert's voice, weak but clear. "Eleanor, don't move, play dead." And I realized something incredible. I was still alive. The pain was so intense I thought I would go crazy. Every fiber of my body screamed in agony. I felt blood running down my face and something wet and sticky soaking my clothes. But Robert's voice echoed in my ears like a divine command: "Play dead." With a willpower I didn't know I possessed, I remained completely still, controlling even my breathing so it would be imperceptible. A few feet away, I could hear the moans of pain from Liam and Jessica. They had also survived the fall, but from their groans, they seemed to be in worse condition than we were. "Jessica," I heard my son's broken voice. "Are you okay?" His concern for his wife made my stomach churn. This man, who had murdered his own brother and had tried to kill us, was still capable of feeling love for someone. "I think I broke my leg," Jessica moaned. "It hurts so much, Liam. What about the old people?" The disrespectful way she referred to us confirmed what I already knew. We had never been family to her. We were just obstacles on her way to our money. I heard movement as if Liam were crawling toward us. My heart was beating so fast I was afraid he would hear it. "They're dead," he announced after a few minutes that felt like hours. "Both of them have their eyes open, but they're not breathing." His lie filled me with a strange hope. If he believed we were dead, maybe we would have a chance. "Perfect," Jessica whispered with a satisfaction that chilled my blood. "It worked just like we planned." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Well, except for the part where we fell too. At least we won't have to pretend we love them anymore." For the next few minutes, that felt like an eternity, Liam and Jessica discussed their situation. Both were injured, but they could move. The plan now was to crawl until they found a place from which they could call for help, and then tell the story of how they had miraculously survived a tragic accident that had killed their poor grandparents. "Remember the story," Liam said to Jessica. "We were taking pictures when a rock came loose under Dad's feet. He tripped and, trying to grab on, pulled Mom with him. We tried to help, but we fell too. It's important that our stories match." "I know," Jessica replied. "We've practiced this 100 times. We're the traumatized survivors of a family tragedy. Poor us. We lost our dear in-laws in a horrible accident." Her performance was so convincing that if I hadn't lived the truth, I would have believed every word. Gradually, their voices faded as they crawled toward what they hoped would be their salvation. When silence finally fell, Robert whispered my name so low I could barely hear it. "Eleanor, are you okay?" I answered in the same whisper, confirming that I was alive but terribly injured. "My left leg is broken," he told me in a voice choked with pain. "And I think I have a few fractured ribs. What about you?" I did a mental inventory of my body. I felt a stabbing pain in my right arm. My head throbbed as if someone were hitting it with a hammer, and there was definitely something wrong with my shoulder, but I was alive, and that was more than I had hoped for. "We're bad, but we're alive," I whispered. "Robert, there's no signal down here." That was the most terrifying part of our situation. We were alive, but trapped at the bottom of a gorge, injured and with no way to communicate with the outside world. If no one came to look for us, we would die here slowly from thirst, hunger, or our wounds. "Robert," I whispered before it's too late, "I need you to tell me everything. Everything that really happened the night Nicholas died." My husband sighed deeply as if he had been waiting for this moment for 25 years. The confession was only a whisper, but it echoed with the weight of decades of guilt. That night, Robert began, his voice a trembling whisper, as if the darkness of the gorge demanded absolute silence. "Nicholas came to find me in the workshop. He was furious. He had papers in his hands, bank statements. He showed me evidence that Liam had been stealing money from our accounts for months. Small amounts at first, but then larger sums. Nicholas had been investigating because he had noticed discrepancies in our savings. The physical pain in my arm and leg mingled with the emotional agony as I listened to the truth that had been hidden for decades. Nicholas wanted to confront Liam that same night, Robert continued. I tried to calm him down, to convince him to wait until the next day, but he was determined. He said he couldn't sleep knowing his younger brother was stealing from us. "And you followed him?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. I followed him because I was afraid of what might happen. I knew Nicholas's temper when he got angry, and I also knew, well, I had noticed something strange about Liam lately. A coldness that sent shivers down my spine. When I got to the gorge, Robert continued. I found them screaming at each other. Nicholas had the papers in his hand, waving them in Liam's face. You're a thief, he was yelling. You're stealing from our own parents. Liam denied everything. He said Nicholas was crazy, that he was making things up. My heart raced as I imagined the scene. My two sons facing off in the dark, one accusing the other of betrayal. What happened next? Robert paused for a long time before continuing. Nicholas told him that if he didn't return the money and confess everything to us, he would tell us the truth himself. Liam went berserk. He yelled that Nicholas had always been the favorite, that he had always had everything easy, that it was time for things to change. And then Robert's voice broke. Liam pushed Nicholas. It wasn't an accident. He pushed him with all his strength deliberately. I saw Nicholas trying to keep his balance, saw his arms flailing desperately, looking for something to grab onto, but it was too late. Tears streamed down my cheeks, mixing with the blood from my wounds. Why did you never tell me the truth? Robert sighed deeply. Because when I got to where Liam was, he was crying, trembling, telling me over and over that it had been an accident, that he hadn't meant to do it. He begged me not to tell you anything, that he couldn't lose you too. But you knew it was a lie, I murmured from the bottom of my heart. Yes, but he was my son, Eleanor, my only surviving son. How could I turn him over to the police? How could I destroy what was left of our family? His justification hurt as much as my physical injuries. And the stolen money? I continued. Liam promised me he would return it little by little. He swore it had been a bad decision, that he had been desperate, that it would never happen again. But he never returned a single penny. In fact, he kept stealing, and I kept quiet because every day that passed made me more of an accomplice to his crime. Just then, we heard voices in the distance. Liam and Jessica had managed to find help. Soon, rescue teams would be here, and our murderous children would play the role of their lives, the traumatized survivors of a family tragedy. The voices got closer and closer, accompanied by the sound of helicopters flying over the area. The rescue team had arrived, and with them came the most crucial moment of our lives. Robert and I had to make a decision in a matter of minutes. Should we continue to pretend to be dead until we found the perfect opportunity to reveal the truth, or risk being rescued along with our murderers? Eleanor, Robert whispered urgently. The phone recorded everything that happened up there. We have Jessica's confession about the plan. We have Liam admitting that we are obstacles. We have everything. But if they find us alive now, they can destroy the evidence before we manage to hand it over to the authorities. He was right. If Liam and Jessica realized that we had survived and heard their confessions, they would find a way to silence us forever. This time, it wouldn't be an accident. It would be something much more direct and definitive. We had to wait for the perfect moment. They're down here, Liam's voice shouted from above. My parents, please hurry. His performance was perfect, his voice broken with pain and despair. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed he was a son devastated by the loss of his parents. Sir, stay calm, an authoritative voice replied, which must have belonged to the head of the rescue team. We're going to come down to evaluate you. You and your wife can move. I heard the sound of ropes and equipment being prepared for the descent. Jessica had perfected her role as the grieving widow. I can't believe this happened, she sobbed. We were taking pictures, so happy. It all happened so fast. A rock came loose and they fell. Every word was a stab in my heart because I knew she would repeat those same words to the police, to the media, to anyone who wanted to hear her version of events. The rescuers began to descend. I could hear their voices getting closer, the sound of their boots against the rock, the clinking of their equipment. Robert discreetly squeezed my hand, reminding me that we had to keep up the act no matter what happened. They're here, one of the rescuers shouted upon finding us. We have 2 people at the bottom of the gorge. He approached us and began to examine us. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing so shallow it was almost imperceptible. I felt his hands looking for a pulse on my neck, his ear close to my mouth, trying to detect breathing. "This one still has a faint pulse," he announced, referring to Robert. "The woman, I'm not sure. I need the medical team down here immediately." My heart raced. The plan was working. They would believe that Robert was on the verge of death but still alive, while I would be close enough to death to not be an immediate threat. For the next few minutes, which felt like hours, the paramedics worked on us. I felt them put an oxygen mask on me, check my wounds, and secure me to a stretcher. The whole time, I had to fight against every instinct in my body that screamed at me to open my eyes, to ask for help, to stop pretending. "The man is stable, but critical," I heard one of the paramedics report over the radio. "The woman is in very serious condition. Pulse is almost imperceptible. We need to transport them to the hospital immediately." Perfect. They would take us to the hospital, where we would have the opportunity to talk to the authorities without Liam and Jessica being able to silence us. During the ascent on the stretchers, I could hear Jessica's faint sobs and the words of comfort that the rescuers offered her and Liam. "You were so brave to survive this," someone said to her. "It's a miracle that you're relatively okay." If only they knew that the real miracle was that Robert and I were alive to tell the truth. In the medical helicopter, as we flew toward the hospital, I could feel Robert's presence on the stretcher next to mine. The paramedics were focused on keeping him stable, and from their conversations, I understood that he was in critical condition. His injuries were more serious than mine, and for a terrible moment, I feared he might die before we had the chance to reveal the truth. "Ma'am," I heard one of the paramedics say to me, "if you can hear me, hold on. We'll be at the hospital in a few minutes." His voice was gentle, full of a genuine compassion that contrasted dramatically with the falsehood I had been hearing from my own family. When we arrived at the hospital, the chaos was immediate. Doctors and nurses ran from one side to the other, shouting medical orders I didn't understand. I was taken directly to an emergency room where they began to work on my injuries. I had to keep pretending to be unconscious, but I also had to find a way to communicate with someone I could trust. "Doctor," I heard a nurse say, "her vital signs are strange. Her pulse is stronger than we would expect for someone in her supposed condition." My heart skipped a beat. They had discovered me. I was such a bad actress that my own body was betraying me. The doctor murmured. "It happens sometimes in cases of extreme trauma. The body has mysterious ways of clinging to life. Let's keep a close the lady. Well, the next few hours will be crucial. We've done everything we can." Melissa made a sound that was supposedly a sob of pain, but to me it sounded like a sigh of relief. "Can we see them?" Liam asked. "Just for a few minutes. We need to say goodbye just in case." The doctor agreed, and soon I heard footsteps approaching my bed. It was the most dangerous moment of all. I had to convince my murderous son that I was really dying. I felt Liam's presence next to my bed. His hand touched mine, and it was all I could do not to pull my hand away immediately. "Mom," he whispered, "if you can hear me, I want you to know that I love you. I'm so sorry this happened." His words were poisoned honey, sweet on the surface but deadly in their essence. Jessica approached from the other side. "Eleanor, dear," she murmured, "you've been like a mother to me. We'll never forget you." Liar. The only reason they wouldn't forget me was because they would have to live with the knowledge that they had murdered me. But then Liam leaned closer to my ear and whispered something that chilled my blood. "I hope you've learned your lesson, Mom. You should never have asked so many questions about our finances. Some truths are better left buried, just like Nicholas." At that moment, I knew our plan had worked. Liam had just confessed, and even though I had no way to record it, there was a nurse in the room who had heard every word. Liam's whisper echoed in my ears like a direct confession of his guilt. He had mentioned Nicholas. He had admitted that some truths should remain buried. And most importantly, he had acknowledged that our questions about finances had been the reason for our accident. The nurse who had overheard the comment, a young woman named Inez, according to her ID badge, had frozen next to the monitoring machine. I saw through my half-closed eyelids as her eyes widened in surprise and horror. She had heard something she shouldn't have heard, and her expression told me she understood the implications of those words perfectly. "What did you say about Nicholas?" Jessica whispered, obviously surprised by the mention of the dead brother. Liam tensed, realizing he had said too much. "Nothing," he muttered. "I just meant, well, Mom always wondered what really happened that night. I guess it doesn't matter anymore." But it did matter, and Jessica was smart enough to realize that her husband had made a mistake. "Liam," she said in a tense voice, "let's go. The doctors need space to work." I could feel the tension between them, the mutual understanding that they had said too much in the wrong place. After they left, the nurse Inez approached my bed. "Ma'am," she whispered so low I could barely hear her. "I know you can hear me. What I just heard is not normal. If you are in danger, you need to tell me somehow." Her voice had an urgency that filled me with hope. Someone else had started to suspect. Very slowly, almost imperceptibly, I moved my index finger. It was the smallest possible movement, but Inez noticed it immediately. "Oh my God," she whispered. "She's pretending to be unconscious." I moved my finger again, this time twice. "Yes, listen," she said, leaning even closer. "I'm going to pretend I'm checking your monitors. If you are in danger from those people who were just here, move your finger 3 times." Without hesitation, I moved my finger 3 times. Inez gasped. "They did this to you?" 3 more movements. The nurse moved away from my bed and pretended to check my Roman 4 while she processed what she had just discovered. I could see in her expression that she was struggling with the decision of what to do. Finally, she approached me again. "I'm going to talk to the doctor in charge," she whispered. "But I need you to keep pretending until we can protect you. Do you understand?" I moved my finger once. The next few minutes were agonizing. Inez left the room and I was left alone, waiting and praying that she would believe my story and take the right actions. Finally, I heard footsteps approaching. It was Inez accompanied by an older man who must have been the chief doctor and, surprisingly, 2 police officers. "Ma'am," the doctor said in a low voice, "Nurse Inez told me about your situation. If you can hear me, we need you to know that you are safe now. The officers are here to protect you." A wave of relief so intense almost broke my act. "Can you open your eyes?" one of the officers asked. Slowly, very slowly, I opened my eyes. The hospital light blinded me for a moment, but I gradually managed to focus on the worried faces surrounding me. "Thank God," Inez murmured. "I thought I was going crazy." "Ma'am," said the police officer, a middle-aged man with a serious expression. "I'm Detective Johnson. We understand you may be in a very dangerous situation. Can you tell us what really happened on that mountain?" My voice came out as a raspy whisper after hours of pretending to be unconscious. My son and his wife pushed us." The words were a bitter truth, finally set free after a quarter of a century. The unwinding of the lie had begun. The next few hours were a whirlwind of statements, recordings, and revelations. I told Detective Johnson everything I knew: Nicholas's death, Liam's thefts, the pressure to change our will, and finally the plan to murder us on the mountain. But the most important thing was the recording on Robert's phone. "Your husband has recorded evidence?" the detective asked, his eyes gleaming. "Yes," I replied. "Everything is on his phone. The confessions, the plans, everything." The detective immediately went to the room where Robert was being treated. Robert had regained consciousness an hour after me, and when the detective explained the situation, he handed over his phone without hesitation. "Here's everything," he said in a weak but firm voice. 25 years of lies and the truth about what happened today. While the police technicians analyzed the recording, Liam and Jessica remained in the waiting room, playing their part as devastated family members to other hospital visitors. They had no idea that their careful performance was about to end forever. "The recording is clear," the detective announced after an hour. "We have explicit confessions about Nicholas's murder, admissions about stealing money, and direct evidence of premeditated attempted murder against you too. It's more than enough to arrest them." "But are you going to arrest them here?" I asked, concerned about our safety. "If they realize we're alive and talking," the detective nodded, understanding my concern. "We already have officers in position. As soon as we have the arrest warrant signed, we'll take them in. In the meantime, you are both under police protection." The irony of the situation was not lost on me. Liam and Jessica were downstairs, likely talking to other patients' relatives, receiving condolences for our deaths, planning how to handle our funeral and inheritance. They had no idea that upstairs in the hospital rooms we were tearing down their carefully constructed world of lies. "Is there anything else?" the detective said, pulling out a folder of papers. "After hearing your story, we investigated your son's finances. Not only is he bankrupt, as you suspected, but he also owes money to some very dangerous people, unofficial lenders who don't take excuses." My blood ran cold. "You mean that we weren't just inconvenient to him?" He confirmed it, the detective said. "You were his only salvation. With your inheritance, he could pay off his debts and start over. Without you, he would probably be dead in a few weeks." That revelation added a new dimension to the betrayal. He hadn't just seen us as obstacles, he had seen us as his financial lifesaver. Our death was not just convenient for him, it was absolutely necessary for his survival. "And what will happen to our grandchildren?" I asked, feeling a new wave of pain at the thought of Liam and Jessica's innocent children. "Social services will take temporary custody of them," the detective replied gently. "But as I understand it, you could apply for custody once you recover from your injuries." The idea of raising the children of our own murderers was overwhelming, but it was also the only way to ensure that something good would come out of this nightmare. Those children were innocent, and they deserved a chance to grow up in a home where love was real, not feigned. "It's time," the detective announced when an officer entered the room with papers in hand. "The warrants are signed. We're going to arrest them now." Through the window of my room that overlooked the hospital parking lot, I could see police officers discreetly positioning themselves. The moment I had been waiting for 25 years had finally arrived. "Liam Black and Jessica Black," I heard the firm voice of the officer in charge. "You are under arrest for the murder of Nicholas Black and the attempted murder of Alina and Robert Vance." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Jessica's hysterical voice. "What are you talking about? We're the victims here. Our in-laws died in an accident." "Ma'am," the officer replied calmly, "your in-laws are alive, and they have provided complete evidence of your crimes." There was a moment of absolute silence, followed by a scream of desperation from Liam. "That's impossible. We saw them die. They were dead." His involuntary confession was captured by the police recorders, adding another piece of evidence to their case. Through the radio, I heard Jessica begin to blame Liam. "It was all his idea. I didn't want to do any of this. He forced me." And Liam, in desperation, screamed, "You were the one who suggested the cliff. You planned all of this." In a matter of minutes, the alliance that had lasted for years fell apart as each one tried to save their own skin. Detective Johnson returned to my room an hour later with an expression of satisfaction mixed with sadness. "They're arrested and on their way to the station," he informed me. "They're both trying to blame each other, which only strengthens our case. But there's something else I need to tell you." "What else?" I asked, though I wasn't sure my heart could handle any more revelations. "During the arrest, we found this in your son's backpack," he said, showing me a small digital recorder. "Apparently, he had been recording his conversations with you and your husband for the past few weeks, probably looking for evidence that you suspected something." My blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" The detective sighed. "It means he knew you were starting to discover the truth. The trip to the mountain wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a direct response to your suspicions. In one of the recordings, you can clearly hear Jessica telling him, 'We have to act fast before they go to the police.'" The depth of the planning and the coldness of the calculation took my breath away. They hadn't just planned to kill us. They had been monitoring our conversations, evaluating the level of danger we posed to them. We were mice in a maze, and they had been the scientists observing our every move. "There's something else," the detective continued, "that we found in the investigation of his finances. Your son not only owed money to dangerous lenders, but he had also forged your signature on several documents trying to access your bank accounts. If you had died on that mountain, he would have had immediate access to all your resources." Every new revelation was like another stab. My own son had not only planned to murder me, he had been actively stealing from me, forging my signature, and violating every principle of family trust. "How much money did he steal in total?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "About $50,000 over the last 5 years, the detective replied. "Small amounts that he thought you wouldn't notice, but which, when added up, amount to a significant sum. The money Robert and I had saved over decades of hard work, penny by penny, had been financing our son's life of luxury while he planned our murder." The following days in the hospital were a whirlwind of police interviews, visits from lawyers, and calls from news media that had picked up the story. The local press had titled the case "The Unbearable Betrayal of Elmwood Drive," and reporters from all over the country wanted to hear our version of events. My sister Harriet arrived from the neighboring town, crying and hugging me as if she hadn't seen me in decades. "Eleanor," she said over and over. I always knew there was something strange about Liam after Nicholas's death, but I never imagined he was capable of this. Her words comforted me because they confirmed that my maternal instincts hadn't been completely blind. "And the kids?" I asked about my grandchildren, who were now in the temporary custody of social services. "I saw them yesterday," Harriet replied sadly. "They're confused, asking why their parents can't come home. They're too young to understand what really happened." The lawyer we had hired, the same Albert who had prepared our will, came to see us with news about the legal process. "The case is solid," he assured us. "With the recordings, the confessions during the arrest, and all the financial evidence, it's almost impossible for them to escape significant convictions." But then he added something that chilled me to the bone. "However, they are trying to negotiate a lesser guilty plea by claiming it was a crime of passion, not premeditated." "A crime of passion?" I exclaimed indignantly. "They planned this for weeks, bought special equipment, and chose the perfect place." Albert nodded gravely. "I know, and we have evidence of premeditation, but their lawyers are going to argue that it was a desperate decision made under extreme financial pressure. The idea that they could receive reduced sentences for their crimes filled me with fury. They had murdered Nicholas. They had tried to murder us. They had stolen our money for years, and now they wanted to present themselves as victims of circumstances. "What can we do to ensure they get what they deserve?" I asked. "Testify," Albert replied simply. Your testimony, combined with all the evidence, will be crucial for the jury to understand the true nature of these crimes. But I warn you, it's going to be emotionally devastating to face your son in court. He was right. The idea of looking Liam in the eyes during the trial, of listening to his lawyers try to justify the unjustifiable, of publicly reliving every moment of this nightmare was overwhelming. But it was what I had to do for Nicholas, for us, and for my grandchildren who deserved to know the truth about their parents. 3 weeks after the arrest, Robert and I were finally able to go home. Our wounds had healed enough to allow us to move, although he still needed crutches, and I had my arm in a sling. The house felt strange, as if it were the set of a play after all the actors had left. Everything was exactly as we had left it on the day of our family outing. The breakfast dishes were still in the sink. The bed was unmade. The flowers Liam had brought me that week were still on the kitchen table, now withered and dead. It was as if time had stopped at the moment our normal lives ended forever. Do you think we'll ever be happy again? I asked Robert that first night back as we lay in our familiar bed. He hugged me with his uninjured arm and sighed deeply. I don't know, Alina, he said, but we're alive. We have the truth on our side, and for the first time in 25 years, we don't have to live with secrets. The trial began 6 months later. On the day I had to testify, I looked Liam directly in the eyes for the first time since the arrest. I saw no remorse, no pain. I didn't see the son I had raised. I saw a cold and calculating stranger who had disguised himself as my son for decades. When I finished my testimony, after recounting every horrible detail of our experience, I addressed him directly from the witness stand. Liam, I said, I don't know who you are, but you are no longer my son. My son died the night you killed Nicholas, and what has been living in his place for 25 years is a monster that I unwittingly helped raise. The jury deliberated for 3 days before finding Liam guilty of first-degree murder for Nicholas's death and first-degree attempted murder for what he did to us. Jessica received the same conviction as an accomplice. Both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, 1 year later, Robert and I have begun the process of formally adopting our grandchildren. They are beautiful and innocent children who deserve a chance to grow up knowing what true love is, not the manipulative and toxic love they received from their biological parents. Every night when I tuck them in, I tell them about their uncle Nicholas, the brother they never knew. I tell them about his kindness, his honesty, his dream of a brighter future. And so, my story ends not with a final goodbye, but with a new beginning. I thank you for listening, for bearing witness to a truth so hard to tell. May your own hearts be filled with light and your homes with the genuine love of family. I wish you all health and happiness.